So when was the first nuclear fusion reactor built? I mean, is this a new thing? I mean, as I was saying earlier, that this is technology that's not new. The Navy is not releasing through the patent system new technology. This is old technology. And I mentioned earlier, the 1970s and 1980s was when the Navy was producing these kinds of technologies for its secret space program. Well, we know that this is actually pretty close to how things played out in terms of the timeline. David Adair claims that he's a whistleblower, an insider, claims that in 1971, he was taken to Area 51, where he saw a truck-sized version of his prototype electromagnetic fusion containment engine. And he says that he developed his small-scale version with the help of the US Air Force, because his patron was General Curtis LeMay, the former Chief of Staff of the US Air Force. Basically, LeMay sponsored Adair, who was 17 at the time, who was a personal friend of the family. And he saw Adair as a genius. And it turns out that Adair had built a miniature nuclear fusion rocket or engine that was very similar to a truck-sized version that had been recovered from a crashed extraterrestrial craft that was being held at Area 51. So the Air Force arranged for Adair to build his device to make sure it was feasible and that it worked. And when it did work, Adair goes to Area 51, where his device was targeted. And he says he was then taken under Area 51, where he saw a truck-sized version of his nuclear fusion reactor. So right there, you're being told that in 1971, this is when it happened, that in 1971, the Air Force sponsored a 17-year-old and was there all along the way in helping him build a miniature nuclear fusion reactor that was kind of like a miniature version of this larger nuclear fusion reactor used on an extraterrestrial spacecraft that had crashed and was being studied at Area 51 and was being reverse engineered. So that was in 1971. Okay, so right there, the Air Force and the Navy, since the early 1970s, have known about nuclear fusion devices, reactors, and have been building them for their craft, for the craft that the Navy eventually deployed in deep space, in their space battle groups. And now, after 40 years, this technology is being released through the patent system. And in the 1970s, William Tompkins talked about Nautilus class nuclear attack submarines being retrofitted with these, being retrofitted so that they were converted from underwater craft into space-going craft. And he described the exotic propulsion and energy systems for the deployment in outer space. Obviously, with a Nautilus class nuclear attack submarine, you have a nuclear fission engine, but that doesn't give you enough power to be able to propel a spacecraft or to develop the electromagnetic fields that Salvador Payés has introduced us to, that could propel your craft into space. What you need is a very large power supply, and that's where the nuclear fusion reactor comes in. So now we get the timetable, we get the idea. Okay, it was in the 70s, that's when the Navy and the Air Force start building these nuclear fusion reactors. And the Air Force starts using them for its secret space program. The Navy starts using it for its secret space program. And the Navy uses these nuclear these Nautilus class nuclear attack submarines as prototype spacecraft. And they retrofit them so that they could basically be flown out into space. So, you know, I talk about that in that particular article on my website. US Navy patent for nuclear fusion reactor supports claims of mile-long space carriers. So this tells us, okay, so we know from what Corey Gord, William Tompkins, Gary McKinnon, and other insiders have been revealing that the Navy has these miles-long space carriers. Well, the question is, what powers them? Well, now we know. It's these nuclear fusion reactors that can generate, well, you know, the basketball size version can generate 1 gigawatt, which is still much more than the power supply in the Ford class aircraft carriers, which only generate 0.7 gigabytes. That's 700 megawatts. So a basketball size nuclear fusion reactor could generate 1 gigawatt, and Pais says that they can be scaled up to generate 1 terawatt, 1,000 gigawatts. And that's the kind of power supply you would need to power a kilometer-long spacecraft or mile-long spacecraft, like one of these space carriers. You would need one of those or several of those to be able to power these kinds of craft to go out into space. So now we know what the nuclear fusion reactors are doing as far as the Navy is concerned, and why the Navy is not so concerned about releasing this now. I mean, this is technology that's 40 years old. Who knows? Maybe the Navy has developed something that is even far more powerful than a nuclear fusion reactor. Okay, so one of the things that some of you might be interested in is, other Navy patents related to the videos of the Tic Tac UFOs that we've been seeing. Okay, well, the first article discussing the Navy pilot sightings of the Tic Tac UFOs was published on May 14, 2015 by Paco Chierici, or Chierici, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, a former Navy aviator. It was based on a classified Office of Naval Intelligence report. And then the first patent was filed by Pais in July 2015. I mean, those are pretty close. What are the chances of that just being coincidence? That the first article and the leaking of a video of this Tic Tac UFO, that you have this being published in May of 2014, and then only a couple of months later, 3 months later, you have the first patent. And again, it involves the Navy. And interestingly, this naval aviator, Paco, says that he was given a classified Office of Naval Intelligence report on the 2004 Tic Tac event, and that's how he used that information in his article. So here you have the Office of Naval Intelligence actually encouraging someone to write up a story about the Tic Tac, getting the information out, because the Navy wants people to know. The Navy's ready to kind of like get the public up to speed. Okay, so this is Brett Tingley and Tyler Roggaway, where they're talking about this. Quote, normally I would agree with others that these patents are likely just the Navy ensuring that when or if this technology does become available, the US will be able to control it. Thanks to the STARS Academy, the Department of Defense, and the media at large, not only are we now being told that Navy pilots have witnessed aircraft behaving exactly like the craft these patents describe, but some of the pilots' visual descriptions of these anomalous craft even seem to be uncannily similar to the drawings of the aircraft as depicted in Pais patents. So basically there's a connection here between the Tic Tacs and the other sightings that Navy pilots have been reporting on that happened in 2014, that happened in 2015. And so there is a connection. And I think, yes, there is a connection. It's because the Navy wants the general public to start paying attention, that there are electromagnetically propelled secret spacecraft out there that have been developed by the Air Force, by the Navy, and they want the public to know about this because this needs to be made available to the civilian world. This classified black world technology needs to be white worlded. And so that's something that we see with the Tic Tac event. Interestingly, this person has just come forward. He's a new insider. He's a former US Air Force intelligence specialist, worked for the Air Force from 1984 to 1988, and has been working with different military contractors and with different intelligence community ever since. He's one of these really gifted people that knows everything you need to know about electronic communications. So because of that, he found out through a source that first began to report on the Tic Tac sightings that the craft were made at Plant 42 in Palmdale, California. And of course, this is where they were being made. So Palmdale, or Plant 42, is a very important facility for the US Air Force. It's where Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman operated, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So this is where they're building it, and this is where, according to this insider, based on what he has seen himself through his own intelligence work and from what he was told, that this stuff is being built at Palmdale, California. Interestingly, the alien reproduction vehicle that was seen in 1988, that was discussed at the 2001 Disclosure Project by Mark McCandlish. This was first seen in 1988 at Palmdale, and it was seen at Plant 42. So Plant 42 is where these things are being built by Lockheed Martin, by Northrop Grumman. And remember what I said earlier, that early on, Salvador Payez worked for Northrop Grumman on advanced concepts design. So right there's an important connection between Palmdale and Plant 42 and what is happening now with the Navy releasing these patents. So these craft that you see here on the slide, these also operate using electromagnetic field technologies similar to what are in Salvador Payez's patents. So what we're witnessing now is a transition. I mentioned earlier, we are seeing a lot of these technologies being transferred, being built, that are being built secretly by the Air Force, by the Navy, and they're being quietly transferred to Space Force. So Space Force, of course, has been in the news. It's the 6th branch of the US military. Currently, it's under the Department of the Air Force. The plan is, though, that eventually there'll be a department of the Space Force. Why is that important? Well, it's important because currently the Air Force has a secret space program, and there's no problem transferring all of that over to Space Force, which is under the control of the Department of the Air Force. No problem at all. But the Navy has a space program as well, a deep space program. And this is something that is not going to be simply transferred over to Space Force, because that would mean the Department of the Navy relinquishing control of its miles-long space carriers to what it regards as a junior, inexperienced military service called the Department of the Air Force. And the Navy would never do that, because it's only the Navy that knows how to run aircraft carrier battle groups and knows how to run space carrier battle groups. And the Navy has the most advanced technology. The Navy has been working with much more advanced extraterrestrials, or been working with extraterrestrials that have been more willing to reveal some of the advanced technologies and the full capabilities of electromagnetic propulsion systems than what the Air Force has been doing. And I talk about that in my book, the US Air Force's Secret Space Program, how and why the Air Force suddenly broke from the group of extraterrestrials it had been working on for a long time in understanding some of these advanced technologies, to working with another group that had been working with the Navy for a lot longer. So what are we witnessing here? We're witnessing a transformation. And Salvador Payés is part of that transformation, as is the Navy. And I've been talking about the Navy a lot, why they want this technology to come out, why they view it is in their national security interest to have this technology come out. But I haven't, Salvador Payés, what about him? He's pretty mysterious. We don't know anything about him other than that he's a very talented inventor, got his PhD in 1999, worked at Northrop Grumman, where he may have well been first exposed to some of this secret space program technology, because Northrop Grumman has operations out at Plant 42, and Payés did work on advanced aerospace concepts designed. But what I find very interesting is his name. And so some of you, I'm sure, have come across this, may have seen this, but his name is really intriguing. Salvador. In Latin, that means savior, or in Italian. Caesar, a leader. País, in Spanish, that means country or home. The US Navy is the protector of the US Republic, protector of the Constitution. So when you put all this together, what you have is the Navy and Salvador Payés representing the Jungian archetype for the savior of our nation. Another way of looking at that is that they are transformational change catalysts. They are providing us with the information we need to transform from a caterpillar, to transform our society from a caterpillar into a butterfly. So we're witnessing a global transformation. These technologies that the Navy has been revealing now through these patents are nothing short of a remarkable global transformation that are fully intended to transform our world from a caterpillar into a butterfly. The nuclear fusion reactor is going to supply virtually unlimited portable power supply. The room temperature superconductor store energy for long periods cheaply at room temperature, wherever you need to store large amounts of energy. And of course, if you have a nuclear fusion reactor that's generating an incredible amount of energy, you need some place to store it. You need superconductors to store all that energy. So this is where the room temperature superconductor comes in. Now you have a way of storing vast amounts of energy. The high energy electromagnetic field generator. This can protect cities, regions from missile attacks. This is a transformation in itself, right there, very important. We are transforming from a society, from a mad society, a society of mutually assured destruction, where major powers like Russia, the United States, China can threaten the whole planet with nuclear extinction by unleashing nuclear Armageddon. Now, with this high energy electromagnetic field generator, you can protect cities, you can protect regions, you can protect even an entire planet from these nuclear weapons, from coronal mass ejections. Think about it. Now with the nuclear fusion reactor, you have a device, you have a power supply and a means of being able to generate sufficient energy to generate these high energy electromagnetic field generators that can protect cities and regions from any kind of an attack. So nuclear weapons become obsolete, or maybe they'll think of some use for them, but essentially we move from a doctrine of mad, we move from being a mad world into a world where we are protected. We move into a protected world, that you live in a city that is protected from nuclear attacks, from meteorite strikes, from rogue comets, from coronal mass ejections, or from any other attack that conceivably could be experienced. So this is a new world we're moving into. It's remarkable. That's what's becoming possible. The hybrid aerospace underwater craft transforming civilian aircraft industry that's based on the fossil fuel industry into something that's using electromagnetic field propulsion systems, gravitational wave generator. Now we have spacecraft that use these wave generators that can kind of bend space-time, so we can actually achieve this kind of like warp drive, this Alcubierre warp drive that's achievable by using these kinds of gravitational warp generators, where you could travel not only really quickly throughout our solar system, but into deep space, even into other solar systems, so that we begin establishing space colonies. So we are really witnessing a global transformation. And right now, even though we're all kind of like being forced to spend time in our homes, we're in a cocoon. But that's an opportunity for us to get up to speed on these things. I mean, videos like this one, live streams like this one should be seen by everyone. And now people at home have an opportunity to watch this incredible range of videos that are out there that Neil was talking about, that Portal to Ascension has, including this one, and we can all be part of this incredible global transformation. And so finally, we have this, and I'm kind of very exciting, the idea that Starfleet can be emerging. The US Space Force is the kernel, is the nucleus of a Starfleet. I don't think it's accidental that the logos are so similar. The Space Force was never intended to be something that just belongs to the US military. Space Force, to begin with, it's located under the Department of the Air Force. Eventually, Space Force is going to be moved into a new department, a department of the Space Force, and that's going to be something that's going to be international. All the nations are going to be involved. And just as NATO really is just an extension of the US military, even though NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is ostensibly a multilateral defense alliance, anyone that's involved in it knows that it's really just an umbrella for the US military, the US Air Force, US Navy, and now the US Space Force, using NATO for its purposes. Space Force is going to be the same. It's going to become the NATO of space. But we're not going to call it the NATO of space. We're going to call it something like Starfleet, Starfleet Command. And it's going to be multinational, all the major nations that cooperate, that are willing to share in these fantastic technologies are going to be involved. And that includes, I believe, Russia, China, India, Brazil, all the major aerospace countries that have space programs are going to be involved in this future Starfleet. And this is all going to be happening very soon, very quickly. So, where can you get more information about my books? Well, I have my Secret Space Program series. Those are the 4 that are out at the moment. So you can get them now on Kindle, on Amazon. I've got audiobook versions of all of those, so you can listen as well. Also, the new book, Rise of the Red Dragon, that comes out next month. You can pre-order the Kindle edition now. You can just go to Amazon to pre-order the Kindle edition. Or you can pre-order the autographed version at exopolitics.org now. And I hope to be able to make the paper book version available for pre-order on Amazon soon, but I'll announce that when that happens. And an Audible edition is forthcoming, so we will make this available for you to listen online. So that's it as far as the presentation is concerned. I think we're in for an incredible journey. And I want to thank you all for being part of this and signing up and being educated in a lot of these concepts. And now's your time, because once this video is finished, once this webinar is finished, then the work, it's your work. You know, you got to educate people. You got to get people to know about this. People need to know about these Navy patents. People need to know about what is happening, why it's important that people get up to speed on that. So you have a great tool. Portal to Ascension is a great resource that you can use online. You can just send out those letters, those e-blasts. Let people know. They've got to watch this. They've got to learn about what these Navy patents are all about, get them up to speed, and the kind of incredible transformation that is happening. And as you do that, you know, we're all together. This is a team effort. This is not, I do the research, I go out there, do the research, I put together these webinars, these presentations, but it is a team effort. We are all working together. We are in this kind of cocoon at the moment. We are all working from home now. Many of us are now literally stuck at home. We are in a cocoon. We are working together. And so we need to get this information out there to many others, to the world. That's how we are going to transform this planet from a caterpillar Earth to butterfly Earth. So now I turn it over to you, Neil, and I'll take a quick break, and now we'll be having questions.